Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for our program, Lifting Every Voice, celebrating MLK Day. My name is Helen Liu, and I am the Programming and Partnerships Manager at Cary Library. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank the Cary Library Foundation. Their support enables us to bring programs like today's event to you. During our program today, we will take a unique look into the songs that inspired marchers during the Civil Rights Movement. Aniece Kerr, Lexington resident and active participant in the Civil Rights Movement, will share a brief history of each song and their significance to the movement. The songs are performed by Candice R. Henry, Nellie R. Henry, Gwendolyn Kerr, and Stephen Kerr. This program is made possible by Cary Library in partnership with the Association of Black Citizens of Lexington. If you have any questions during the program, please submit them to the Q&A. Now I'd like to introduce your host, Aniece Ragland Kerr. She's a Lexington resident and a native of Anniston, Alabama. She is a graduate of Tuskegee Institute and Atlanta University. Aniece is also a board member of the Friends of Cary Library. And Jonathan Suber will be our moderator today. He is a Lexington resident and a native of Wilmington, Delaware. In addition to serving as president of the Association of Black Citizens of Lexington, ABCL, he is a member of Lexington Town Meeting and active in the Lexington Catholic community. Aniece and John, welcome. I'm now going to hand the program off to you to host and moderate.
Welcome, and thank you for joining me in this celebration of Martin Luther King Day. This is a look at songs and the history of the movement and what it was like growing up in the midst of the struggle in Alabama. When the Civil Rights Movement came to town, I don't remember the exact month or the exact year. I knew about, and we knew about, the lunch counter sit-ins in North Carolina. We knew about the bus boycotts that had happened in Montgomery. But both of these were miles away from the small town in Northeast Alabama. Now I will tell you something about this small town in Northeast Alabama. Anniston is located in the southernmost part of the Appalachian Mountains. It is 65 miles from Birmingham, 65 miles from Birmingham, and 91 miles east of Atlanta. We knew people who would commute to Birmingham and to Atlanta to work. We knew people who commuted to Birmingham and Atlanta for shopping. Anniston had a population a little more than 25,000 at this time, the early 60s we're talking about. And of that 25,000, 10% were African Americans. Anniston was known as the model city during this time, and its economy was based mainly on textiles, industry, and the Iron Foundation. Just the signs of the Civil Rights Movement happened. My first signs of the Civil Rights Movement in Anniston happened right after the Mother's Day Massacre, which took place on May 14th, 1961. And this was when the Freedom Riders were passing through Anniston on their way to New Orleans. The bus started in Washington, D.C. A few days earlier, and it was filled with civil rights workers or riders. They were a mixed group, both African American and white. When the bus got to Anniston, it was met by a mob. And this mob, using chains, bats, rocks, iron bars, attacked the bus at the Greyhound bus station. They even slashed the tires. The bus was able to get away, headed for Birmingham. But what had happened, a group of the ruffians, as our local newspaper called it at that time, got in front of the bus, so that slowed the bus down. And after a while, the tires on the bus flattened and they had to pull off. And when they pulled off, a bomb, well, the back window of the bus was slashed. A bomb was thrown into the bus. And of course, the bus filled with smoke and the riders were leaving. There was a fire and smoke, and the riders exited the bus. And as they were exiting the bus, they were savagely beaten. This went on for a short time until the second bus came and they left there going to Birmingham. One of the songs that they sang, they were singing all this time, but they were blooded. And once they got to Birmingham, many of the riders had to be hospitalized because they were seriously injured. When they got to Birmingham, Reverend Shuttleworth thought that said that they would end the ride. He said, it's not worth it. We are not going to continue on to New Orleans. At that time, CORE was the sponsor of the bus ride, and their office was in Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville called and said, you must continue. Shuttleworth said, no, we're going to call this off. But during this time, during the phone call from Nashville, Shuttleworth knew that his phone was tapped. It was tapped by the police and it's tapped by the fire department. He knew this. He could hear them in the background. So what he did, he used a code. And this code was to agree to the march continuing. This code was a code that was understood by Southern Blacks, but it was not known to Connors. It was not known to the white community. And what Shuttleworth said was, send the speckled chickens. Speckled chickens meant the integrated group, which included the pullets. The pullets were the women, and the roosters. The roosters were the men. Send them on to Birmingham and the ride will continue. But during this time, as the ride did continue, and one of the songs that the riders on the bus composed at this time was a song to the tune of the Banana Boat song. And I promised my brother I would not sing, but the song went, I took a trip down Alabama way. Freedom's coming and it won't be long. I met much trouble on Mother's Day. Freedom's coming and it won't be long. The Mother's Day massacre started like any other Sunday in Alabama. If you know anything about the South, you know that everybody went to church on Sunday. And not only did you go to church on Sunday, but this Sunday was a particular Sunday. This was Mother's Day. For Mother's Day, most of the churches had programs. And one of the memories I have is that on Mother's Day, you wore a rose, you wore a flower, and you wore a red flower if your mother was alive, and you wore a white flower if your mother had died. And there was always some program, there was always this, it was a celebration of the mothers. Dinner time, lunchtime, church is over, lunchtime you go home, and this is when the bus arrived, and this is when we heard about what had happened at the bus on Mother's Day. I don't know, I can't remember how we found out, but being such a small town, I'm sure the word spread word of mouth, and we knew what had taken place during that time. This is when I think, to my knowledge, is when Anniston became involved in the movement. This is when the Black church, we talk about the Black church and the importance of the Black church. Most of our ministers in Anniston were college educated and they were seminary trained. One minister at 17th Street Baptist Church, N.Q. Reynolds, name was Nimrod, which we love that, was a very good friend of Martin Luther King. And Dr. King would come to Anniston when he wanted to get away. He would come to Anniston just for an R&R. And my brothers talk about the King children being outside while the adults were inside either having a meal or a meeting, and they remember playing with the children at this time. The Black church was involved in this because the SCLC at this time, the Southern Christian Leadership, was made up of ministers, of African-American ministers. The ministers were one of the most important leaders in our community. The church was owned and controlled by Blacks. So it was independent of the larger Black society. Many of our people worked for companies and they had to go to work, but the church was independent of anyone in that instance. The ministers were skilled in management. If you were the minister of a church, you had control of what went on in your church. The church was the center of the Black community. It was the meeting place. It provided movement for the masses. This is why the church is where most of the mass meetings were held, because this was the community center there. The church was also the center of faith and strength and hope. It was much more than a religious gathering. The church was also a place for political meetings and community events. The civil rights movement relied heavily on the church because it was the heart of the people's movement. The church had a rich culture of songs, testimonies, preaching, and prayer. And these spoke to the needs of the people. Many of the songs came from our church hymns, came from spirituals, and they were the spirit of the protest movement. When we would have these mass meetings, many times they would sing for a half an hour or more before the meeting got started, because these songs lifted the spirit. It was what fired the people up at these mass meetings. As I said, the songs would last for a half an hour. There was no song sheets. We didn't have any song books. There was no song leader or anything, no soloist. Many times you had a song leader and they would start to singing. But anyone who was inspired could change the lyrics and it continued, and the song would go on and on and on, suiting the struggle that was at hand. And they sang congregational style. This is what they were used to singing. Everyone sang, no soloist, no leader. So the congregation was singing. And there was no instrument. There were no instruments. You were clapping your hands or stomping your feet. How did the word get out about these meetings? How did people find out about these meetings? Well, it was word of mouth. Anniston being a very small town, it was word of mouth. And the meetings would be at different churches. One day it might be at 17th Street. The next day it was at Mount Calvary. The next day it was somewhere else. And many times they were once or twice a week. I think Monday and Wednesday were 2 days I remember. Birmingham was a much larger city. And I remember there was a disc jockey in Birmingham, and because they had larger churches and everything, and how they got the word out was he would inform the people of a meeting, and he would say something like, there's a party going on Monday night at 16th Street Baptist Church. Everyone is invited. And we all know there are no parties at a Baptist church. But this was code for there is going to be a meeting at the church on Monday night. The next day, he was a disc jockey. He would just report on if anything happened. And then he would say something like, see you on Wednesday. Here again, there was a code. There's going to be a meeting come Wednesday. What happened at these meetings, at these rallies? This is where, for many of us, we found out what was going on. Anniston being a small town, I don't think we didn't have any boycotts. At that time, there were no marches or anything, but we knew what was going on in Birmingham. We knew what was going on in Montgomery. We knew what was going on in Selma. We knew what was going on in Albany, Georgia. We knew what was going on in Mississippi and everywhere. And at these rallies, they would have workshops. And these workshops taught you the philosophy of nonviolence. They taught you how to act, what to say, and how to protect yourself. Many times they had people there that would show you if you were struck, if you were hit, you would roll over, curl up, put your hands over your head. You were trying to protect your head and protect other vital organs. Also at these church rallies, you have to take a commitment to join the movement. And in this commitment, you took an oath. And in this oath, you had to agree to be nonviolent. You had to agree to turn the other cheek. And if anything happened, and if you couldn't agree to these, then you were asked not to join the march. We know of the leaders of the civil rights movement. We all know about King, we know Abernathy, we know Shuttlesworth, we know James Foreman, and there are many others. But it was the foot soldiers that carried on and kept the movement alive. Moving in these marches, we had children, we had teenagers, we had adults, we had Christians, we had Jews, and we had people of other faith. And it was the foot soldiers that faced being beaten. It was the foot soldiers that faced going to jail. It was the foot soldiers that were murdered. There were several members murdered. There were several people murdered during the civil rights movement. And many people, it was the foot soldiers that also faced the loss of a job. But the foot soldiers came out of the church, and their song is what kept them going. Now, let's look at some of the music and some of the songs that inspired and moved the civil rights movement. Woke up this morning with my eyes on freedom. Woke up this morning with my eyes on freedom. Many of the people knew that they would go to jail, they would get hurt, they would be killed, but there was they had an understanding with the Lord that this was what God wanted them to do, and He was always with them. Fear, they didn't know fear. They didn't know what fear was. Let's hear that song.
Well, I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Well, I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. I'm walking and talking with my mind, stayed on freedom. Oh, I'm walking and talking with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Well, I'm walking and talking with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. I'm singing and praying with my mind, stayed on freedom. Yeah, I'm singing and praying with my mind, stayed on freedom. I'm singing and praying with my mind, stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Woke up this morning with my eyes on freedom. When they got up that morning, they knew the police would be waiting for them. They knew they would be jailed. Many of them could go to jail. And they knew they would be charged. What were some of those charges? Unlawful assembly, demonstrating without a permit. Now, do you think they were going to get a permit? Disorderly conduct. You're marching and you're singing, yet you are disorderly. And the last one was marching, you were disturbing the peace. Mine was set on freedom. Before the rallies, the demonstrators or the marchers would pray. They would pray that everything would be successful. And the one thing they had to do was to leave a phone number and an address of the next of kin, because if they went to jail, they decided they would stay. Going to jail was a badge of honor. At this time, especially in Birmingham, the marchers said they did not want to be bailed out. They did not want to be bailed out. There were children as young as 7 years old that were jailed for 4 and 5 days. There were people that were jailed for up to a week. What they would do in jail, they would have prayer meeting, they would sing and sing and sing. Many times the boys were separated from the girls in the same jail, and they would sing to let them know where they were and if everything was okay. Another song that came out of this movement was one of the civil rights workers, and it was, "If you miss me at the back of the bus." "If you miss me at the back of the bus" was written by Charles Neblett, and the music was a traditional African-American song, "Oh Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan." And here again, they would take the music and take the song and fit it to the situation. If you miss me at the back of the bus, I'm in Birmingham. If you miss me at the back of the bus, I'm in Selma. I'm in Jackson. I'm in wherever. Now let us hear that song.
If you miss me at the back of the bus and you can't find me nowhere, come on up to the front of the bus. I'll be sitting right there. I'll be sitting right there. I'll be sitting right there. Come on up to the front of the bus. I'll be sitting right there. If you miss me at Jackson State and you can't find me nowhere, come on over to Ole Miss. I'll be learning right there. I'll be learning right there. I'll be learning right there. Come on over to Ole Miss. I'll be learning right there. If you miss me at the picket lines and you can't find me nowhere, come on down to the jailhouse. I'll be rooming over there. I'll be rooming over there. I'll be rooming over there. Come on down to the jailhouse. I'll be rooming over there. If you miss me at the cotton fields and you can't find me nowhere, come on down to the courthouse. I'll be voting right there. I'll be voting right there. I'll be voting right there. Come on down to the courthouse. I'll be voting right there.
The freedom songs came around the 1960s. And this particular song, "If You Miss Me at the Back of the Bus," was a part of the Freedom Riders. And the Freedom Riders sang this song, but they also sang other songs as a way of keeping their spirits up. And it helped to dissipate the fear. And when you're singing, no matter what the song is, there was this sense of calmness and a sense of reassurance. And many times the writers or the marchers would say, once I started to sing, I went to another place. Once I started to sing, I didn't fear the dogs. I didn't fear the water cannons. I didn't hear the people out there screaming at me. We were singing. And of course, there was a reason to fear. There was a reason to fear because many times they were beaten. They were met with bats and iron bars and trains and bombs. And even many of the riders were murdered. Another song that we sang, and this one was probably not as popular in our area, but in my town, but it was popular in areas where there were sit-ins, because the sit-ins or the bus rides had moved from the bus to the lunch counters. I don't remember lunch counters. North Carolina had to sit at the lunch counter. Birmingham, larger city, Montgomery, a larger city, they had these lunch counters. And at these lunch counters, many times they would be spat on. Of course, they would refuse service. And one lunch counter participant talked about being at a lunch counter, and there was a white worker there, and he was mopping the floor. And he was told by the white manager to throw that bucket of dirty water on them. And this participant said, I could see in the man's eyes, I could see he did not want to do it, but this was his job. And what he did, rather than pick up that bucket of water and pour it on the participants, he poured it on the counter, and the water ran down the counter. There are many instances where many of our mothers and fathers could not participate because their jobs depended on working. Many of the women were domestics. They worked in private homes. They worked in laundries. They worked as maids in hotels. Many times they would be asked by their employer, or do you march? Do you participate in the marches and all of this? So they had to bring home money. They had to feed their families, but they supported. Many of them let their children march. They gave money to the cause. If they couldn't afford to give money, they brought food. They brought food. Many times at the churches, at these rallies, mothers would bake a cake, and they would bring this cake. Or if they had $1 or $2, they would give it to a marcher and say, take this money and buy something to eat. They would bring bologna sandwiches, peanut butter sandwiches, cheese sandwiches. They did what they could to support the march. We shall not be moved. Let us hear that song.
We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved. We're fighting for our rights, and we shall not be moved. We're fighting for our rights, and we shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved. We shall all be free, and we shall not be moved. We shall all be free and we shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. Oh, we shall not be moved. God is on our side and we shall not be moved. God is on our side and we shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved.
We go back to the Black church. The songs, the spirituals, the music is what kept people going forward. This is what, there was fear there. To say we were not afraid is to lie. There was that fear that, but the singing took you out of yourself. The singing was something that you knew, you felt you had to do. You felt you had to march. You felt you had to be there. If changes were to happen, then you had to be out there marching. If not for yourself, you were making it better for those who were coming after you. Another song of its time was "Oh Freedom." And "Oh Freedom" was a traditional song, and this song was adopted by SNCC. SNCC came along after the Southern Christian leadership. Southern Christian leadership was Martin Luther King Abernathy, made up mainly of ministers. SNCC was a different kettle of fish. SNCC were younger people, many of them not exactly inclined to go along with the nonviolent aspect of the movement, but out of respect for King, most of them did. Most marchers would start from a church and they would start off singing. And many times, especially in Birmingham and larger cities, students talked about they would get up and they would go to school and they would walk, they would leave school. In one school, they said there were 1,200 students in the student body, and 1,100 of us left school during the middle of the day. They would leave school and they would meet at a meeting place. Many times the meeting place would be a church. In Birmingham, 16th Street Baptist Church, which we all know, that was a church that was bombed where the 4 young girls were killed. But they would meet at 16th Street Baptist Church and they would divide them into groups. You would have boys and girls in a group. You would have at least 6 in a group. No one marched alone. You always marched in a group. Many times you would be given your picket sign and you were told which direction to go. The police had informants. They knew that there was marchers getting ready at the church. But what the Rallies did, they would send one group off in one direction. And of course, the police would chase them down, take them off to jail. And when they found out their group had been jailed, they would send another group off in another direction and they were jailed. And they kept doing this and doing this. And sometimes they would have up to 150 marchers in jail at one time. The paddy wagons, as they call them then, could not keep up with all of these people that they were doing. But before they would leave for this march, there would be prayer. Of course, there would be prayer. And once they were jailed, they would also have a prayer meeting. As I said earlier, many times they were in jail anywhere from 5 days to a week. Every morning they got up and they had prayer. And in the morning, they had a prayer meeting. At noon, they had a prayer meeting. At night, they had a prayer meeting. And it was during this time that they would sing the songs of the Black church. They would sing the hymns that they sang in church. They would sing the freedom songs that they had learned. In many instances in Birmingham, they talked about they would sing all day and all night. And the jailers got tired of them singing, and they would tell them to shut up. And they wouldn't stop singing. They continued to sing. Then what they would do, they would start to sing Dixie. I wish I were in Dixie, way down in Dixie. They would do this to try and keep them from singing. But they kept on singing, oh freedom over me. Let's hear that song.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. Over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. No weeping, no more weeping, no more weeping over me, and before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. There'll be a singing, there'll be singing, there'll be singing over me, and before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. There'll be shouting, there'll be shouting, there'll be shouting over me, and before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Many of these participants knew they were going to be jailed. They knew they were going to be jailed. But they said, if I'm jailed, don't bail me out. Up until this point, the NAACP raised money to bail out people who had been jailed. But they were getting very low on funds. SNCC came along, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and student SNCC's thing was, we will stay in jail. We will stay in jail. And in jail, 150 or more young people would get that one phone call. And that one phone call, and in many times they said they would call home and tell mom and dad, I'm okay, don't bail me out. And they would stay there for a week or more. The song that most of us know, and it's called, I think it's called the anthem. I think it's called the anthem of the Civil Rights Movement, is We Shall Overcome. We Shall Overcome has a long and varied history. It's an African-American gospel song, spiritual, whatever you want to call it. There is really no date to mark its birth. In the 1800s, there was a song called I'll Be All Right. I'll Be All Right. And in the 1900s, Albert Tinley, who was the son of a former slave, and he was the pastor of a large church in Philadelphia. And he wrote a song called I'll Overcome Someday. I'll Overcome Someday. And this was known, it became very popular in the Black churches around the country. I'll overcome someday. Southern Black churches sang a song they called I Will Overcome. And the words and the lyrics were a little bit different from the ones that Tinley had wrote, I'll overcome someday. But here again, we don't know, we have no idea. I will be all right. I'll overcome someday. I will overcome. But in the 1940s, we do know in Charleston, South Carolina, Black women workers at a tobacco plant, they were part of the union there, and they were protesting the poor conditions there, and they had a march. And in this march, they would sing songs that they knew from the church. And they started off, this is 1940, singing, I will overcome. But because it was a group, instead of saying, I will overcome, they would sing, we will overcome. These were the food and tobacco workers of union, and they said, together, we will overcome. Some of the workers attended at that time the Highlander Folk School in Tennessee. Now, the Highlander Folk School was a school in Tennessee that was integrated. It was international. And people came from all over to this school. They would have young people came from Europe. The Shuttlesworth children attended this school one summer. And here, this is where they would share, we will overcome. At this school, Pete Seeger was a teacher. So was Septima Clark. They were both teaching at the school. And this is where he heard and he learns of this song. And this is where Pete Seeger and Septima changed the words, changed the title from We Will Overcome to We Shall Overcome. Now, this is the 1940s. In 1957, Pete Seeger was at an event where Martin Luther King was the guest of honor. And at this event, Seeger sang, We Shall Overcome for the first time. Early in the 1960s, we had a folk singer by the name of Guy Carawan, and he shares this song with the civil rights activists around the country. And this is how the song started to spread around the country. Activists, sit-in, freedom riders, they all sang, We Shall Overcome. The participants were harassed. If you were marching, if you were sitting in, if you were demonstrating, you knew you were going to be harassed. You knew you were going to be beaten. You knew you were going to be jailed. So they would sing, We Shall Overcome. We are not afraid. We are not afraid. We are not afraid today. They would all join in singing that as they were taken off to jail. Now, let us hear the song.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we'll walk hand in hand someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall live in peace someday.
We Shall Overcome became the anthem of the civil rights movement. In 1962, the Freedom Singers reformed. And here we have Aniece Ragland. Many of us know her from Sweet Honey in the Rock. But Bernice was from Albany, Georgia, not Albany, Albany, Georgia. And they performed this song and other songs, and the word spread. And this song, along with many others, were used to raise money for the movement. In 1963, April 28th, August 28th, was the March on Washington. And here again, the marchers joined hands. And as they were marching, they would sing, walk hand in hand. We will walk hand in hand. We will walk hand in hand, and we shall overcome someday. March 7th, 1965, the Selma March, Bloody Sunday. We shall overcome. We heard that again. Right after that, the week after the Selma March, Lyndon B. Johnson, president, made a speech. And in that speech, he said, and I quote, "We must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice, and we shall overcome." Lyndon B. Johnson. And following that speech, we saw the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I cannot end this part, I cannot end this program without a song that was not a part of the marching. It was not a part of most of the rallies because it was a difficult song to sing. But almost all meetings and rallies would end with the singing of this song. This song is found in many hymnals. It was written by James Weldon Johnson. The lyrics, his brother J. Roseman Johnson wrote the music to this. These brothers were from Jacksonville, Florida. They wrote this song. Well, James attended Atlanta University. Roseman came to Boston and attended the New England Conservatory of Music. But given the times, of course, they could not find jobs. So they returned to Jacksonville and they both got jobs in the school department. James was a school principal and his brother Roseman, head of the music department there in Jacksonville. And in February of 1900s, they wrote a song that the school children could sing in celebration of Lincoln's birthday. And I can remember President's Day growing up, all in our school, there was a bulletin board. And on February, you always had this silhouette of Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. We celebrated President's Day. And at that time, many times we had a week, what they call Black History Week. But it was during this time that the brothers wrote a song. And that song was for the school children to celebrate Lincoln's birthday, because Johnson believed that an uplifting song would be the way for Black people to express their pride with who they were. 20 years later, the brothers left Jacksonville. They went to New York. And 20 years later, James, even before that, James became a part of the NAACP. And as a part of the NAACP, he began to encourage the singing of this song as a Negro national anthem. Years since has been sung by many, many millions of people. And we know it as the Negro national anthem. And when you heard the bars to that music, you immediately rose to your feet. You knew when they started to play Lift Every Voice and Sing, you were to stand up and sing Lift Every Voice and Sing. I don't know if they sing it as much nowadays, but I think still at many events I have been in where they still sing Lift Every Voice and sing. Now let us hear Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the glistening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
There is no way I could do all of the songs that were part of the civil rights movement. That was just 5 of the songs. But here again, the songs of the civil rights movement came out of the Black church. These songs came out of our gospel songs, our spirituals, and it came from the hymnals. A few of these other songs, just like to lead with a few of the other songs. One was Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching down to Freedom Land. And this song was, the children the Children's March in Birmingham would sing this song. This is around 1967. And then they would add, ain't gonna let Bull Connors turn me around. Ain't gonna let George Wallace turn me around. Ain't gonna let no posse turn me around. They also sang this song in Albany, Georgia. Ain't gonna let segregation turn me around. No police, no jail cell, no killing, no despair. You would just, leaders, when you would have these rallies, anyone could just insert something in there and you would keep that song going on and on and on for half an hour. Another song that was very popular at the rallies, Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace. There are many, through many dangerous toils and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. Another song. Dwelling in Beulah land, far away, the noise of strife is upon my ear, is falling. Then I know the sins of earth beset on every hand, doubt and fear and things of earth in vain to me are calling. None of these shall move me from Beulah land. Here again, these are the rallies. Farther along, often I wonder why I must journey over a road so rugged and steep, while there are others living in comfort, while I labor and weep. Farther along, I'll fly away. When the shadows of this life have grown, I'll fly away like a bird that prison bars has flown. I'll fly away. Here again, these were the spirituals. Some of them date back as far as the Underground Railroad, but these were the songs that would get the people going at the rallies. Jesus, won't you come by here? Come by here. Another song. Eyes on the prize. Hold on. Keep your hand on the plow. Precious Lord, take my hand. Stand by me. Sweet hour of prayer. In seasons of distress and grief, my soul has often found relief and often escaped the tempter's snare. By thy return, sweet hour of prayer. Family, do not get on me. We'll understand it better by and by. And sometimes some of these spirituals were modified for the civil rights movement. Every time I feel the spirit, I will, free at last, thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. I'm going to do what the Spirit says do. I'm going to jail when the Spirit says jail. I'm going to move when the Spirit says move. I'm going to pray. I'm going to sing. I'm going to dance. I'm going to do what the Spirit says do. Another song, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Here again, you're singing this congregational style at these meetings. And it could go on and on and on, because nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Over my head, up over my head, another version, another title for it, there's trouble in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head, there's trouble in the air. Over my head, they would substitute weeping, singing, praying, joy, freedom, victory over my head. And standing in the need of prayer. Standing in the need of prayer. Here again, those mass rallies, you got the people going. And the last one, come and go with me to the land where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be loving in that land. This is just something of my memories, something of the songs that I know made the civil rights movement. And most of this music came out of the Black church. Without the spirituals, without the gospels, without those people singing at those mass rallies, without them singing as they marched, where would we be today? Where would the struggle be if that had not taken place? This is the end of my speech, but before I end, I have to thank my family and friends for all their support and helping me pull together this program. Thank you. I could not have done it without you. Many of these memories I had forgotten, but I could get on the phone and I could call a sister or a brother or a friend, and they got it straight. So thank you again. Thank you. Jonathan.
Thank you, Aniece, for this moving presentation of music and history. Thank you also for sharing your family with us. They're obviously very talented, and we're fortunate also to have a living witness to history, yourself, among us in our community. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. You're
So
welcome.
at this point, we'd like to take questions from the audience. If you could write your questions in the Q&A or chat for Aniece, we'd appreciate it. So while we're waiting, I have one question. Where can we get a copy of this great music?
Candice R. Henry. I'll talk to Candice.
Okay.
But you know, while we're waiting for that, I want to talk something about my neighborhood of Anniston, Alabama. And growing up in Anniston, we had 2 Black doctors. We had a dentist. We had the lawyers. We had real estate. We had a hotel. We had a cobbler. We had funeral homes. We had beauty parlors. And there was 15th Street was the neighborhood there in our neighborhood. And when I heard about Tulsa, I thought about this was our small Tulsa. It was not as large. It was not a bigger city, but we had everything there. We had grocery stores. I didn't leave my community to go for anything. I think I was a teenager, an early teen, before I went downtown. Everything we needed was right there within our neighborhood. I didn't have contact with whites because they passed by, they drove by the neighborhood. The only contact would be white farmers would come by in the summertime, and they would have their trucks and they would be selling vegetables and fruits and all of that. And we would buy. The first time I was called the N-word was in Boston. When I came to Boston. Never heard that in Anniston. Never, ever. Not to say that it didn't happen, but I didn't really leave that cocoon of our neighborhood because we had everything we needed in our neighborhood. We didn't have to go downtown. We didn't have to be in South. There was a movie theater downtown. There were 2, but my parents said, if you can't sit where you want to sit, then you aren't going. I think I was out of college before I went to a movie. And at that point, integration had taken place, you know. I don't know if they had segregated water fountains. We didn't go downtown because my mother said you will stay at home. If you can't use a bathroom or if you can't get water, then you would stay at home. So I don't remember. As I say again, I was much older before I went downtown. At that point, you didn't have to do that. So Anniston was this still small microcosm of what was going on. And I must say about Anniston also, there was a lot to lose. It was a small town, but we had Fort McClellan, a military base, home of the Chemical Corps, home of the military police, home of the WACs. We had an ordnance depot, Fort McBynum, where they stored all the chemicals and everything. So we had Jacksonville College, State College was in the area. So the white businessmen got together with Black church leaders and they decided that how we were going to integrate Anniston. 2 Black ministers on a Sunday were invited to go to the library to apply for the first library card. We had a branch of the library in our neighborhood where I went, a new building and everything. So I didn't need to go there, but to open up to them, they were met by a mob, ruffians, as Anniston Star called them. But they went back the next day and they were issued library cards. So this was the integration of Anniston. I think because there was so much military and government not control in Anniston, because if the soldiers were to come into town to shop and they were met with all of this, they wouldn't come into town. So the businessmen knew that. Growing up, only one business that we know of was burned, and that was a white business on a hardware store, because he was on the council. He was on the Human Rights Council, and they burned that. I don't remember any crosses being burned. Things happen. They happen because both communities, Black and white, worked together to see that there was a peaceful as possible transition to integration. We knew who the bad boys were. Everyone knew who they were. We knew them by name. But businessmen said, you are not going to ruin our town. And this is what Anniston was like.
Okay. So we do have a couple of questions now.
Okay.
The first question is from Ethy Slate. How did those jailed finally get released? What did it take?
Many of those jailed, what happened after a while, they just released them. But, they would stay in there and they were saying they had to feed them, and they were released because SNCC had said, we are not going to be bailed out. So they would release them. They were just released because at this time, many of them were students. Many of these are young children, as young as 7 years old. So they kept them in there and then they sent them back home.
Okay, thank you. The second question comes from Tom Scheipel. Beautiful program, thank you. Have you attended a rally since the 1960s that reminded you of the spirit of the civil rights rallies?
I can't, that's a good question. I can't think of a rally. I've attended rallies here in Boston, but none of them reminded me of what it was like there. I attended Tuskegee, and I must say this, Stokely Carmichael was on campus all the time. The professors thought he was a student there. But, Stokely Carmichael, Julian Bond, H. Rap Brown. I attended all of those rallies we had on campus where they would, scream at us and knock us down and show us how to protect ourselves. I did not do a lot of marching because at Tuskegee, I was in Tuskegee doing most of the civil rights movement. They were very protective of the female students. So it was mainly the boys who went, but I helped make picket signs. I helped make sandwiches, I did whatever was needed. I was there. And one classmate, Sammy Young, was killed during this time. Sammy Young, same age, he was testing the bus station. He went to the filling station, went to a filling station to use the restroom. He went into the white-only bathroom at the filling station, and he was shot. And I think it was 1966 or 67. But, here again, there were people we knew that were killed during this time.
Okay. There's another question from Jamada Smith. My older brother, a Bostonian, was a foot soldier. We've always asked him to tell us the stories. Perhaps it's difficult. Are there questions available for an interview of sorts for older people who are still living that we can get the story?
There is a book. Are the questions available? I don't know, there are several books on the civil rights movement. There are lots and lots of books that are out there that, you can read. And there are books where different members or different participants have talked about their experience in the movement.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question from Beverly Davis. What connections, themes exist between civil rights movement and current calls for freedom, justice, and voting?
Repeat that again, please.
What connection, themes exist between the civil rights movement and current calls for freedom, justice, and voting?
Theme is out there. I mean, we have a voting rights bill coming up. It's the same. The fight is not over. It's the same thing. If you have to fight for it, you have to vote. And I think it's the same thing. It's always there. The same thing, the Black Lives Matter movement, the same thing is still there, right?
All right. There's one more question from an anonymous attendee. How did discrimination affect you in the Boston area?
It didn't. I was not affected by it. My parents, our parents taught us that you saw people not by their color, but by how they treated you. So I came to Boston, and as I said, the only time I was called the N-word was here in Boston. I worked in Brookline, where I was one of 2 or 3 Black teachers there. I attended meetings, Brookline, Lexington, wherever, where in most instances, I was the only person of color. I was not affected by that. I saw people as people. And if they treated me well, that was all well and good. I can't think of really any instances when I was not treated well or when I was ignored or anything. So I don't know if growing up in the South prepared me for this or what, because except for participating in the civil rights movement, I had no contact with people that were mean or hateful or nasty. We treated people, do unto others as you want to be done unto. And that was what my mother always said, and that's what I live by.
Okay. We have another question from Lisa Bayless. Do you have a favorite song that moves you to this day?
Oh gosh, that's a good one. I think my favorite one is still Precious Lord. And that was not a part of the civil rights movement, but that was Martin Luther King's favorite song. And I like that song. I think many of the songs I love because I grew up in the church. In the church, you left home at 9 o'clock. You went to Sunday school, you had church, you came home, you had dinner, you went back to young adult Bible training and all of that. So all of these songs I know. And when I hear them, it's been years since I've been in a church where we would sing every stanza of the song, but I know them. And there's so many I like. There are just so many of them. I love them all. I put it like that. And I know them all.
Okay. We have another question from Sean Osborne. This is a wonderful program. How did the civil rights movement affect your professional and volunteer choices?
It didn't really affect my professional. There was, as I said, we had everything in our neighborhood. We had a branch of the library. We had a swimming pool. We had the tennis courts. We had the basketball court. I only had to go 5 or 6 blocks to do everything. And I can remember the librarian. My mom took us to the library, especially in the summertime when school was out. We went every other day to the library. The library was open from, I think, 1 to 5 or 1. It didn't open until the afternoon. And when I was the oldest of 7, and when I got old enough, She didn't have to take us. I would take us. I would go, we would be there when the library opened, and we would stay there until the library closed. I can remember reading every book in the fiction section. I started with A and went all the way down to Z. At that point, you had a library fine. I would come home with 5 or 6 books. I would walk down the street holding books. I would fall holding all of these books. And at that point, I would go back almost every day. There was something else to do. And I can remember the librarian was Mrs. Williams. And I would, because I would take home 5 and 6 books, I would forget them. They would be under my bed or someplace. And she said, oh, you owe a fine. And then I said, oh, but put it on Nellie's card, or put it on Bill's card. These are my siblings. And she would do that. And they would go to get a book out. And she said, oh, you have a fine. It was me. So finally, she let me work off the fines. So I worked in the library shelving books. And I decided I wanted to be a librarian. A history major, went to Atlanta University for a library degree. The one and only library job I've had was at Brookline. I got hired in Brookline in 1972. I stayed there for 34 years. I volunteered at the Lexington Public Library. I worked there for a few times when I was home on leave, child rearing leave, for a few years in the children's room, where I did an evening children's story hour. But this is just something I want to do. I want to share the love of reading, and that I've participated in things here in town. You know, I've gone to meetings, I've gone to rallies, but there was a part of me that you gave back, and I gave back. I give back. I continue to give back.
One more question from Alex Kashel. I found this really beautiful and inspiring. What do you think is important for young students to understand today about the music of the movement? She works with elementary age students.
You know, I don't know if they are not events where the songs of the movement, where there's a singing of the songs of the movement. I think for the young people, just an understanding of the history of the movement, an understanding of what happened in the 60s, an appreciation of what the people at that time fought for, what many of them died for, many of them were beaten for, to understand that what we have today is a result of what young people, many of them young people like them, were willing to do, were willing to risk their lives, were willing to go out there and fight and struggle and hope for a change. And we've seen some changes, but there are a lot more changes to come. I mean, we have a voting rights bill that's coming up, you know, and again, you know, so I just think understanding, they said, if you don't know your history, you're bound to, you know, repeat it. And I think just understanding the history and knowing the history of what happened is important for the children, for all people.
Okay, well, we have a few more minutes left. If there are more questions, this is a good time to ask them.
Okay, well, if there aren't any more questions, I just wanted to thank Aniece for a wonderful program. It was so moving, and thank you so much to your family for sharing their beautiful voices, lending their beautiful voices rather to the songs that we really enjoyed today. And thank you, John, for moderating our program. A very nice weekend, and happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day on Monday. Try to stay warm. Thank you all. A recap will be sent that will include the link to this recording as well as a link to the songs that you heard today. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, family.